I wasn't supposed to be driving through northern Maine that late. But sometimes, life doesn't give a damn about your carefully laid plans. The trip was meant to be simple. Drive up to Millinocket to visit my estranged uncle. He'd been in a bad way health-wise, and after some pressure from my mom and a few guilt-laced voicemails, I finally agreed to go see him. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years, not since the summer after high school, and truth be told, I wasn't eager for a reunion. I didn't want to run into anyone I knew from that town, not the neighbors, not the old friends I deliberately cut ties with. There were personal reasons I won't get into, but let's just say I intended to arrive late, spend the night, and leave before anyone had the chance to recognize me. I left my place just outside Boston, around noon. The drive to Millinocket should have taken about 8 hours, give or take. It was late spring, one of those unusually warm days where the heat soaks through your windshield and sticks to your skin like syrup. I planned to arrive by 8 p.m., check into a motel, and see my uncle early the next morning before heading straight back. But somewhere along US Route 201, just past Bingham, my check engine light came on. Moments later, the temperature gauge spiked. I pulled over, popped the hood, and was hit with a wave of hot steam. My radiator hose had cracked clean through. Luckily, I had coolant and a roll of duct tape in the trunk. It was a makeshift fix, but it held. I stopped at a gas station outside Jackman to top up on water, grab a bottle of Gatorade, some trail mix, and a flashlight with working batteries, just in case. I pressed on. By the time I passed Moosehead Lake and started onto the Golden Road, a stretch of remote logging road that cuts through Maine's dense north woods, the sun had fully set. My Jeep Grand Cherokee rumbled steadily over the gravel, the headlights casting narrow beams into the endless tunnel of conifers. Trees pressed in from both sides, tall, unmoving silhouettes in the dark. Then, just past 10 p.m., the Jeep sputtered. The power steering stiffened, dashboard lights blinked, and then the engine died. I coasted onto the narrow shoulder and tried restarting it. Nothing. The starter clicked, but the engine didn't turn over. I tried 3 more times. Still dead. There was no cell reception, no towns for miles, no one to call. I stepped out, checked under the hood again, but it was no use this time. It wasn't something I could fix with duct tape. Feeling the creeping isolation settle into my bones, I climbed back into the Jeep, locked all the doors, and cracked the driver's side window an inch or two for air. The heat from earlier still clung to the interior, making it hard to breathe. That's when the trees started to howl. Not the wind, not animals. It was like the woods themselves were exhaling all at once. This long, low, mournful sound that rolled across the treetops. It rose and fell, circled around the Jeep, and then rose again. Like something ancient and unseen was happy to see me, or warning me I didn't belong. I've camped before. I've heard coyotes, owls, the crack of tree branches in the cold. This was none of that. This was something that felt alive. I told myself I was fine. I was in a locked SUV. It sat high off the ground. Nothing could reach me from the forest. I repeated that like a mantra. And then silence. Everything stopped. The wind, the insects, the frogs, even the birds. It was as if the forest had sucked in its breath and decided to hold it. I sat perfectly still, my heart hammering so loud I could feel it in my teeth. Then I heard it. Clapping. Not loud, not enthusiastic, measured, precise, one after the other, like a slow ripple through an invisible audience. Clap, clap, clap. I don't know how many people you'd need to pull that off, but it sounded like a theater crowd, maybe 50, maybe more, all clapping in some deliberate order, one by one, like a ceremony. My skin went cold. Every instinct I had screamed, "Get out!" I held out for maybe 30 seconds, but the clapping kept going, and going, and going. It was rhythmic, echoing softly off the trees, like it was bouncing from one hidden person to the next. So I ran. I jumped out of the Jeep and sprinted down the road, flashlight in hand, stumbling over roots and potholes. I didn't look back. I must have run for a solid 5 minutes before I saw headlights coming around a bend. 2 men in a pickup pulled over. I barely managed to explain what happened. but they didn't ask many questions, just looked at each other, nodded, and followed me back. They got the Jeep started. Turned out, it was a loose battery terminal. I don't know how it came loose. I don't care. They offered to follow me back to town, but I declined. I just wanted to be moving. My hands were trembling the whole way. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. When I reached the nearest highway junction, I rerouted entirely. I didn't go to Millinocket. I turned south and drove through the night. The next morning, I called my uncle and said something had come up. I still don't know what I heard in those woods. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it was some weird echo effect in the trees. But I've never felt anything like that before. And I will never ever drive the Golden Road at night again. I never talked much about the years I spent doing seasonal maintenance work in the northern parts of Washington state. Not because anything extraordinary happened most of the time. It was the opposite, actually. Days blurred together in routines of gravel roads, broken fences, muddy boots, and cheap canned meals. The forests were beautiful, sure, but they were also dense in a way that made you feel small, like the trees knew you were temporary. This particular job had me stationed near a remote access area of Lake Quinault, not far from the Olympic National Forest. I was there to help clear trails, repaint signage, and assist with nightly checks along some of the lesser-used boat launches and service roads. I'd taken the job because I needed a break from the city, and, honestly, from people. There'd been some personal stuff I wasn't ready to face yet, and this gig paid just enough to keep me afloat. My shift was overnight, 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., paired with a guy named Don, a soft-spoken former forestry tech who had the kind of sun-leathered skin that comes from living your whole life outside. He didn't talk unless he had to, and when he did, it was mostly in short, clipped phrases. But I liked that. Silence felt cleaner out there. Most nights we'd load into the department truck and make the same slow loop. Check the cabins, make sure nobody was trespassing, lock up the trail gates, and pass by the lake shore before heading back to the station. It was mindless, mostly, until that one night that still makes my skin crawl. It was sometime in early March, just before the spring campers started trickling in. The weather had turned strangely warm for that time of year, leaving the air thick and humid, almost swampy. Everything smelled like wet bark and old moss, and the forest floor squished under your boots like a sponge. We'd just finished clearing debris from one of the creek crossings and were heading down the old boat access trail, a narrow, overgrown strip of asphalt that curved sharply around a ridge and emptied out at a neglected launch site. That launch hadn't been officially open in years. It was mostly used by locals who wanted to fish without being seen. Don was driving. I was half dozing with my elbow against the window when the truck's high beams caught movement. Something low and fast darted across the road. "Deer?" I asked, blinking. "Nope," Don said, already slowing down. "That was a person." We rolled forward another 50 feet and came around the bend, and that's when we both saw him. Standing maybe 15 yards ahead, just at the edge where the road met the gravel lot, was a man. He looked to be in his late 50s, thin frame, long, wild hair that clung to his neck and shoulders like wet grass, and the only thing he was wearing, I swear to you, was a pair of tight, grimy white briefs. Nothing else. No shoes, no shirt, not even socks, just standing there under the pale wash of our headlights, his chest rising and falling like he'd just run a mile. In his right hand, he held a thick branch, maybe 2 feet long, sharpened at the end into a crude point. He had it gripped like a weapon, pointed directly at the truck. Don put the vehicle in park, leaned halfway out the window, and called out in his usual deadpan tone, "You all right, sir?" The man didn't answer, didn't flinch. Don tried again. "You lost? Need medical?" The man raised the branch slightly higher, narrowed his eyes at us, and hissed like a goddamn snake. Then, without a word, he turned and bolted straight into the woods. Now, when I say woods, I don't mean a trailhead or even thick brush. I mean solid wall of trees. He didn't follow a path. He just sprinted into the dark like he knew where he was going. The trees swallowed him in 3 seconds flat. Don didn't say anything, just watched the space where the man had vanished, his fingers still resting near the gear shift. I spoke first. Should we follow him? Radio it in? Don leaned back in his seat. We ain't chasing someone like that into those woods. Think he was on something? Maybe. Or maybe he wasn't. We turned the truck around in the gravel and took the longer route back toward the ranger station. Don stayed quiet for the rest of the drive. The radio sat silent too. Even the frogs had stopped chirping. I was driving home from a long weekend visit, one of those trips you plan last minute and regret halfway through. I'd spent the past 2 days visiting someone I'd been seeing casually. Nothing serious, just enough to keep things interesting while we figured out what we were. He lived in a small college town somewhere in southern Pennsylvania. My place was a little under 3 hours north, across mostly empty stretches of road and sleepy farm towns. That night, I'd left a little later than I should have. I remember glancing at the dashboard clock as I merged onto the expressway. It was just past 11 p.m. A light drizzle had started, soft enough to ignore, but steady enough that the wipers had to stay on low. My friend had come along for the trip, mostly for the ride. She was curled up in the passenger seat, half asleep, and still a little tipsy from the wine she'd had earlier. She wasn't much company, to be honest, but I didn't mind the silence. I liked driving at night, especially on long open roads. The highway felt endless, flanked by dark fields and patches of pine. The occasional road sign would glow like a beacon and then vanish behind us. Every now and then we'd pass a farmhouse set back from the road, its windows glowing faintly like someone was still awake inside. But mostly, it was just the sound of the tires and the steady sweep of the wipers. Then the wheels started shaking. It happened suddenly, this low, jerky vibration that traveled up through the steering column. At first I thought it was just the road, some uneven patch of asphalt, but it kept going, growing worse, until I had to fight the wheel to keep the car steady. Shit, I muttered, easing off the gas. My friend stirred. What's wrong? I don't know. Feels like the tire's gone weird. Almost like it had been waiting for the worst moment possible. The road curved, and then like a gift from the universe, I spotted the blue and white sign for a rest stop, 1 mile ahead. I turned off at the exit and rolled slowly into the lot. The rest stop was nearly empty, just a vending machine hut and a couple of old flickering lamps. The kind of place that looks abandoned even when it isn't. The pavement was wet and cracked in places. A pickup truck sat idling near the back corner, barely visible in the dark. Otherwise, nothing. I pulled into a spot and turned the car off. The air hit me the second I stepped out. Cool, damp, and thick with the smell of pine needles and wet asphalt. I crouched near the front passenger side and sighed. The tire was almost flat. Not shredded, not blown out, but definitely not drivable. Great. My friend leaned her head out the window. Everything okay? Flat tire, I said. Go back to sleep. She shrugged and slumped back down. I popped the trunk and rummaged for the jack and spare. I've changed tires before, not fast, but I can manage. It's just harder when it's midnight and you're the only one awake. I was halfway through loosening the bolts when I heard footsteps approaching. 2 guys. They came from the far side of the lot, where I hadn't seen anyone standing. Both looked to be in their mid-20s. Hoodies, jeans, hands in their pockets. One of them was holding a bottle of soda. The other had what looked like a flashlight, though he didn't turn it on. Need some help? The first guy asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I hesitated. I'm good, thanks. You sure? The second one said. We know how to do it. Got some tools in the truck. I glanced past them. No vehicle anywhere nearby. The pickup I'd seen earlier was still parked in the corner. Engine off now. I hadn't seen them come from it. I hadn't seen them at all until they were there. No, I've got it, I said. But they didn't leave. One of them crouched beside me, watching what I was doing. The other drifted toward the front of the car, tapping the hood with his fingers. She asleep in there? He asked, peering through the glass. My friend had pulled a jacket over her head like a blanket. She's fine, I said. Seriously, I'm okay. Appreciate the offer though. Still, they didn't move. The one near me pointed at the jack. Mind if I give it a shot? I stood up quickly. I said I've got it. Something in my voice must have changed because they finally backed off a bit. But just as I thought they might leave, my friend, brilliant timing, opened the passenger door and stumbled out. Hey, she said, voice thick and slurred. Who are your friends? I closed my eyes for a second. Get back in the car. She ignored me. We're changing a tire. You guys helping? The guys exchanged a look. Yeah, one of them said. We're helping. My skin prickled. I stepped in between them and the passenger side door, guiding her back in. Just sit down, please. One of the men tilted his head slightly. You don't trust us? I didn't answer. That's when I heard it. A low rumble of an engine. I turned. From the dark edge of the lot, a car rolled slowly into view. An older sedan, dark color. 2 men inside. They parked across from us. No headlights, no interior light when the doors opened. Just the quiet creak of metal and the sound of boots on wet pavement. I braced myself. This wasn't good. But then the 2 guys beside me looked up, and something changed. Their posture shifted, jumpy, nervous. They muttered something to each other, and without a word to me, turned and walked briskly toward the tray line. Not toward a car, not toward the exit, just into the trees. I stood there frozen, watching until the darkness swallowed them. The 2 men from the car didn't say anything. They just walked up to me slowly. One was older, maybe late 40s, the other younger, thin, wearing a navy jacket. Neither looked like they'd come to make conversation, but they didn't speak. Just nodded toward the car and the tire. I stepped back. They crouched, took the jack and wrench, and got to work. 5 minutes passed in silence. The only sound the soft hiss of the breeze and the occasional clink of the wrench. My friend stayed quiet in the seat this time, eyes wide, clearly sobering fast. When the last bolt was in place, the older man stood up, brushed his hands off, and looked at me. I opened my mouth to say something, but all I managed was a shaky thanks. They nodded once. Then they walked back to their car, started it up, and drove away. No names, no questions, no goodbyes, just gone. I didn't waste another second. I got behind the wheel and drove until my hands stopped shaking. I don't even remember getting back on the highway. All I remember is the way the parking lot felt wrong, like I'd stumbled into something I was never supposed to see. I took a different route on the way back a few weeks later. Added 40 minutes to the drive, but I didn't care. I never saw those men again. But I still wonder about them sometimes, both sets. One came out of the shadows. The other ran from them. And I still don't know which of them I was supposed to be afraid of. It was late October when this happened. I was making the drive back home from my cousin's place out in western Tennessee. He'd just bought a new house and was throwing a weekend barbecue, something to celebrate surviving his divorce. I'd stayed a night longer than I meant to, and by the time I was heading back toward North Carolina, the sun was already dropping low behind the trees. I could have stayed another night, but I wanted to sleep in my own bed, and besides, I liked the solitude of night driving. The route was familiar. Highway 64 eastbound, then the stretch through Cherokee National Forest, winding up through the hills before flattening out again near the state line. I've taken that road dozens of times. It's long and rural, and there are pockets of forest where you won't see another soul for miles. Still, I've always found it peaceful, quiet in a way you can't really get in cities. That night was different though. The weather was calm, cool but not cold, with that brittle sort of stillness that comes just before winter really settles in. I had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder, a soft playlist humming low from the speakers, and a nearly full tank. I figured I'd be home by midnight if I kept a steady pace. I was maybe 90 minutes from home when I noticed the car. It was pulled over on the shoulder of a long, lonely bend in the road. No streetlights there, just the high beams from my own vehicle casting long shadows across the trees. As I rounded the curve, I slowed instinctively. Something about it felt off. The car was a silver sedan, older model. Its hazard lights weren't on, and there were no flares or cones, just sitting there like it had been abandoned mid-ride. The passenger door was open, wide open, and for a moment I thought maybe someone had broken down and walked off to find help. But then I saw them. 2 figures, one standing, the other half seated in the passenger seat. My headlights hit them just right as I passed, and that's when it became clear he wasn't helping her. He was hitting her. I couldn't hear it, obviously, but the way his body moved, sharp, jerking motions, his arms swinging down again and again, it didn't take much imagination to understand what was happening. Her hands were up, trying to block him, but she wasn't fighting back. I kept driving. Not out of fear, exactly. More like disbelief. I needed a second to think. My foot hovered over the brake, but my mind raced with every possible outcome. Should I stop? Confront him? I didn't know if he had a weapon. I didn't know if he'd turn on me, or worse, take it out on her if I interfered and failed. About 100 yards down the road, I pulled over. My hands were shaking as I reached for my phone. I didn't have full signal, just 1 bar, but enough to connect. I called 911, told them what I'd seen, gave them the make and color of the car and the exact location. They said they'd send someone immediately. I hung up and just sat there, engine idling, staring into my rearview mirror. I didn't see them following me, didn't hear any cars, but something kept me there. Long enough for the guilt to settle in. I don't know how long I sat like that, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, just waiting for something to happen, for lights to appear behind me, for the police, for anything. Then, finally, I pulled back onto the road and kept driving. It was quiet after that, uncomfortably so. I still think about her sometimes, and every time I do, I wonder if I should have done more, or if I did too much.